Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, February 6th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu from our new Mo News global headquarters at Industrious in Midtown Manhattan.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. We're gradually transitioning into our new office space here. Jill, we've partnered with the good folks at Industrious. They have offices across the country. You'll be hearing much more about Industrious in the weeks and months to come. But the water's warm, Jill. Come dip your toes. You have multiple toes.
Yes, I'm very excited to come into the office, and I hope to do it within the next couple of weeks.
Yes, in-person podcast. Jill, speaking of this podcast, you put out a question to our listeners on Instagram yesterday.
Yeah, so I actually heard proactively from one of our listeners about some of the go-to things that we say on the podcast here, but maybe we don't realize it. Like for you, they said they actually started a drinking game, hopefully just coffee, that every time you said nonetheless, they would drink. To be honest, I didn't even realize you said nonetheless a lot, but it did get us thinking about the other things that we tend to say here on the podcast. So I put the question out, and so did you, to some of our listeners to see what are our kind of go-to expressions that maybe we could retire.
Yes.
And here is what they said. Apparently I say, okay, Moshe, quite a lot, which I guess I do because it rolls off the tongue, I have to say. And also some listeners pointed out that I have been misusing verse and verses. So verses is like, against something, and verse is like a song lyric. So I will only be using verses unless I guess we're talking on this day.
Yeah, there you go. Song and verse. I got notes. Well, first of all, we should note several of you said, you guys do whatever you want to do. At the same time, some of you said, Moshe, etc. What you use it way too much. And I know I try to catch myself on that. Listen, one of the things when you're doing this sort of thing is that instead of you try to find words that you can go to as you're thinking, just like live, right? Answering questions. And so, etc. Is one, and that sort of takes me as a transition. Basically, notably, ultimately, are three of the words that I also apparently are filler words, along with somebody, Jill, apparently made a point of counting how many times I said here in a podcast. She said in a recent podcast, I said it 27 times. Listen, it's the word here, but maybe I'm using it slightly too much. But thank you, I guess, for counting that, caring that much about the podcast. So I'll try to make a point of finding new filler words because at the end of the day, guys, we are just at many times, this podcast, we have some of this scripted and a lot of it is just conversation. So as I'm transitioning between topics, I was going to say, etc., but I caught myself. I just want you to know that. As I'm transitioning between topics, I will try to find other crutch phrases that you notice less or maybe change it up a little more.
And I do appreciate everyone who listens and noticed and responded. And we know this is all in good fun. So we appreciate the feedback. And a lot of people, as you mentioned, Moshe, were quite complimentary. And we're just like, don't change anything. Be you. Say what you want to say, crutch words or not.
Essentially, basically, notably, ultimately, I will try my best for all of you, etc.
Okay, Moshe. Let's get to the headlines. USAID workers getting pulled off the job, the on-the-ground implications, and what Democrats are trying to do to stop it, and also just stop Elon Musk.
It seems like the most popular topic in Washington these days among Democrats and now among some Republicans is Elon Musk, how much power he has, and whether there's enough guardrails around what the mission he's been given by Donald Trump.
Yeah, even some Republicans now saying that Musk has gone too far. Plus, fallout from President Trump's plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza and rebuild it and displace the Palestinians who currently live there. The White House walking back some of what the president laid out on Tuesday. Meanwhile, another scare at our nation's airports, a Delta Airlines plane and a Japan Airlines plane colliding on the ground in Seattle. Back to politics, a judge blocks Donald Trump's birthright citizenship order nationwide, and the CIA offering buyouts to the entire workforce as part of a huge makeover under the Trump administration. And then, Moshe, in lighter news, apparently some women not interested in men joining their yoga and Pilates classes will go through some of their complaints.
Oh, okay. Any of these in New York?
Yes, it was a story from the New York Post. So I'm guessing a lot of these influencers who took to social media to complain about heavy breathing and grunting for men.
Listen, when I do yoga, there's no heavy breathing or grunting. You don't even notice me in the back. I'm in the back.
And Moshe, you have on this day in history.
Yeah, Mark sent me a couple ideas if you listened to yesterday's podcast.
He did.
We'll have them for you. If you didn't listen to yesterday's podcast, some folks are looking for some new on this days because they remember last year's on this day. And so Mark, a listener, has some ideas for us. He did some research. We'll have that to you.
Okay, USAID workers around the world scrambling to pack up their homes, take their kids out of school, and just figure out what is next for their lives after a sudden Trump administration order that pulled almost all of them off the job and out of the field. The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, announced Tuesday night that nearly all of its 10,000 global employees will be placed on administrative leave over the next 48 hours. And Moshe, there's already been an impact. For example, shipping containers with life-saving antibiotics and anti-malarial drugs are stuck at a port in Sudan. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, essential medicines are expiring. Meanwhile, U.S.-grown soybeans that are destined for refugee camps have instead been diverted to warehouses. One USAID contractor who is posted in an often violent region of the Middle East told the Associated Press that the shutdown had placed the contractor and the contractor's family in danger because they're unable to reach the U.S. government for help if needed. The contractor says that he or she woke up one morning earlier this week, blocked from access to government email and other systems, and an emergency panic button app was wiped off their smartphone. The Trump administration has said the U.S. government would bring the agency's workers safely home as ordered within 30 days. Still, many are fearing that they will be stranded in the field and left to make their own way home. Others have kids who are halfway through the school year, so now they're in limbo. So just a lot of concerns for the people who work for USAID and also for the services that they provide.
One of the things to keep in mind here is that as we're talking about government and cuts and waste, there are human beings, thousands of them, who work for the government, some of whom are contractors here, and they're impacted by these drastic overnight decisions and what has been unfolding there in Washington. And so you have a situation now at the State Department that, despite claiming that life-saving humanitarian assistance programs should continue at USAID, there are reports that, given how stark this was, that a number of them have been disrupted. One thing to note here is that in 2023, the latest data we have is that USAID provided about $2 billion in food assistance, the largest provider of food assistance in the world. Beyond that, you have vaccines, HIV treatment, childbirth care. You have disease prevention programs targeting malaria, tuberculosis around the globe. At the same time, critics here of USAID, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, among them, point to past instances of wasteful spending, including hundreds of millions of dollars on failed infrastructure projects in Afghanistan. This is as we were spending, the U.S. was spending more than $100 billion in reconstruction aid programs, nation building in Afghanistan. You've also had Elon Musk and the White House point out other programs at USAID that they say speak to a liberal, wasteful agenda. Some money, like 50 or 60 grand, I think, for a trans opera in one country, LGBT-focused publications, a Sesame Street for kids in Iraq. By the way, some of these programs sound right for USAID, but there's no way to actually vouch for them because they were once all listed on parts of the USAID website. Elon Musk took down the website over the weekend, so it's hard to actually, when they make these claims, to actually verify them because there was that unverified claim of 50 million for condoms for Hamas or for Gaza. It appears that might have been the Gaza province of Mozambique, not Gaza, not the Gaza Strip. But again, without the websites up, it is very hard to actually verify some of this stuff. And they're not providing more than just sort of verbal mentions of this so far from the White House. So that is part of the challenge here. I think you have an argument from Democrats, even some Republicans, people inside the government who say, well, there's got to be a way to deal with line by line budget cuts without ending the entirety of the agency, the $40 billion agency, 10,000 people, leaving key antibiotics and drugs stranded at ports around the world. Was there a way to do this without going so far? Now, the Trump team would argue, no. The thing is broken. We're going to reset it. They have this whole philosophy of zero-based budgeting, which is eliminate all of it and build it up from the start. But many would argue, and I'm hearing from people in nonprofits who are like, well, some nonprofits won't be there in the future because you've now cut all their contracts and they have to lay off their entire staff. And some of these programs were day-by-day programs, and you didn't give enough thought to what you were cutting because you just basically ended everything all at once, overnight. The old expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In this case, putting literal babies at risk because you didn't like the waste in some parts of the organization. And so that's ultimately part of the debate here that you're seeing unfold. And you're seeing increasing discussion about all of this over on Capitol Hill.
And most Democrats in Washington don't really seem to have a clear strategy to stop Musk, whether it be in terms of USAID or other departments that he has been targeting. Several hundred supporters of the agency rallied outside the Capitol to protest the dismantling of USAID. Musk has also gained access to the Treasury Department system that controls trillions of dollars in federal payments. So earlier this week, Senator Chuck Schumer and other Democratic lawmakers led protests against Elon Musk's access to those key payment systems at the Treasury. They stood outside the building. They chanted, "We will win," as they rallied against his policies. And I just want to play part of the clip that we had posted over on our Instagram so you could get a feel for the vibe there.
I'm going to stand with you in this fight, and we will win. We will win. We will win. We won't rest. We won't rest.
As you just heard, the chant went from "we will win" to "we won't rest." Emotion not exactly instilling confidence in Democrats who are opposed to Donald Trump's plans. Again, we posted the video on Instagram and the comments were universally brutal, saying it is time for some younger leadership to take over there.
Yeah, the brutal comments came from Democrats who are like, who are these guys? Jill, the imagery, if we could describe it for you can head over to Instagram and watch it. There's Chuck Schumer, like waving his fist in the air. We will win. We will win. And then there's a Democratic congressman next to him, Al Green, who is literally waving his cane in the air. So for all the Democrats who are like, we need a new generation of leadership, literally, the "we will win." There's a guy waving his cane.
So when I saw the video, I couldn't tell whose cane it was. I just saw a cane in the air, and people were commenting on there. Is this a parody at this point? What is happening?
No, it's Congressman Al Green, Democrat of Texas, longtime Democrat of Texas. Incidentally, I should mention that he is, or yesterday, he gave a floor speech where he says he's going to be filing articles of impeachment against Donald Trump for what he called dastardly deeds, specifically referring to Trump's plans in Gaza. And so, first of all, bottom line, that ain't going anywhere. Republicans control the House and the Senate. Even if somehow they got it through the House, which they're not because they don't have the majority, it would be Trump's third impeachment that would then not get convicted in the Senate. So that's a bit of Democrats, and again, getting criticism from the base for not doing enough here, not being fast enough, quick enough to deal with all the various things Trump is doing domestically and abroad. I think even some Democrats who knew he would come in here by storm have been surprised at the speed in which he's moving and are at times overwhelmed, don't have much of a strategy to counter much of this, either rhetorically or on Capitol Hill, where, again, they're in the minority on both sides. They have a little bit more power in the minority in the Senate. In the House, basically nothing, given the way those bodies work. Now, at the same time, Senate Appropriations Chair, Republican Susan Collins of Maine. She's a moderate. She sometimes actually publicly criticizes Trump. She's one of those rare Republicans that does that. She told reporters yesterday in regards to Musk, there's no doubt that the president appears to have empowered Elon Musk far beyond what I think is appropriate. I think a lot of it is going to end up in court. Now, we do know that multiple lawsuits have been filed against Elon Musk and the president. We'll see how those go through the system. We will follow them. But the fact that you have Collins here, who has a powerful position in the Senate, saying that might mean that you're starting to see Republicans who say, hey, we might need some accountability here. Getting a lot of attention yesterday, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was asked about Elon Musk and given the tens of billions of dollars of contracts he has with the government, who is policing him for conflicts of interest, right? Because he might be throwing out a bunch of contracts, but is he going to throw out a contract that, say, an agency has with SpaceX or one of his other companies or not? The White House saying, Elon's going to handle that himself. He's going to police himself and determine himself whether there's a conflict there, leading to concern, again, among Democrats and some Republicans saying, can you trust the richest man in the world to police himself on conflicts of interest? I will note, humorously or more seriously, that's sort of how we have the Supreme Court work, too. That's been one of the criticisms of the Supreme Court, is they police themselves on ethics. So in this case, you have, and by the way, that's received no shortage of criticism. Now, in this case, you have the White House saying, listen, the president is in charge of Elon Musk. They put out this NBC report yesterday that Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, has made clear to Musk behind the scenes that he reports to her. But they're also saying publicly, hey, Elon's doing his own thing, and if he sees a conflict of interest, we trust him on that. That's where we stand. We're going to watch all of that. Jill, one of the deadlines I want everyone to pay attention to, March 14th, one of our favorite dates. Why? It's a government shutdown deadline. Back in December, when they kept the government open, they extended it till March 14th, which is now just over 30 days away. Our favorite time of year, and now it comes multiple times a year, sort of like Amazon Prime Day, government shutdown deadlines. So we'll look out for that. That's going to factor in these government, all the various things Elon is up to, and some of these other things we've been talking about will factor into the government shutdown talks.
Okay, now to reaction to President Trump's surprise plan to take over Gaza. Top Trump administration officials on Wednesday seemed to walk back some of the elements of Trump's proposal to take over Gaza and move the roughly 2 million Palestinians who live there to other countries in the region. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, insisting that the president had not committed to using U.S. troops to clear the territory. Here is a reporter asking something, Moshe, that you and I talked about on this podcast yesterday, how this idea really jived with President Trump's promise on the campaign trail to get American troops out of foreign wars. Take a listen.
On Gaza, the president has spent basically his entire public career criticizing foreign entanglements, nation building, sending American troops to fight abroad, particularly in the Middle East. This plan seems like it could ultimately involve all of those things. Can you explain this reversal and how building and owning Gaza squares with America First foreign policy?
I would reject the premise of your question that this forces the United States to be entangled in conflicts abroad. The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've had the same people pushing the same solutions to this problem for decades. And it's been made very clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza. It does not mean American taxpayers will be funding this effort. It means Donald Trump, who is the best deal maker on the planet, is going to strike a deal with our partners in the region.
And then she was asked again if the president was ruling out putting American troops on the ground, and she said that the president has not committed to putting troops on the ground. But Moshe, the reaction from abroad and even from some Republicans here in the U.S. has been skeptical, to say the least.
Yes. Jill, already Wednesday night, approached with this stuff. Lindsey Graham, an ally of the president, said, I think it might be problematic, was the way he put it. Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, said, there's probably a couple kinks in that slinky, which I'm going to start stealing that expression, kinks in the slinky. I like it. Rand Paul said, this is unrealistic. Josh Hawley, Missouri Republican in the Senate, said, I think most Americans would prefer the money be spent here. And so you had that sort of bringing things back because Trump was pretty open. I mean, he shocked, he shocked a number of people, even within the administration, with those comments. Apparently, they were very closely held. There's a lot of reporting on this in the past 24 hours on how this whole idea came to be and surprised everybody. And apparently, he decided to drop it at that news conference. He apparently had run the idea by a few people in the days ahead of announcing it yesterday. Apparently, in reaction to the fact that his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, a fellow real estate developer who's been dealing with the hostage negotiations and the ceasefire deal, came back having actually seen the devastation in Gaza, saying, this is dire. People cannot live there. It is not habitable, maybe for a few people, but not for the vast majority of the population. And no one has any ideas on what to do here. So as I mentioned yesterday, as I've been talking about on Instagram, part of the idea here was to spur action. Basically say to the Middle East, if you don't have a better idea, I'm going to take control of the thing myself. And apparently, Trump has become increasingly obsessed with the seaside real estate there. Puck News, Tara Palmieri over there at Puck, said that part of this idea came from Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, another real estate developer. But CNN reports that the Trump people insist this came from Trump himself, and he held it on a close hold. Unclear if he even told Netanyahu about it, but Netanyahu was smiling ear to ear during that press conference, so clearly liked what he was hearing, regardless of whether he knew about it in advance. But again, the idea was maybe this won't happen literally, but I'm going to try to spur action here, try to get the Arab world to understand that there's no place for these people to live right now. You need to take them in. Now, rhetorically speaking, the way Trump talked about permanently moving them out of the Middle East, I think that's what stunned people. Saying the U.S. will own Gaza. I think some of the phraseology there stunned folks. But it does appear that he was just, trying to spur a conversation, which he certainly did. And you had the Europeans push back. You had the Saudis push back. They put out a statement at 4 a.m. local time after that press conference. That's how quickly they wanted to get out there, expressing their unequivocal rejection, their quote, of any attempt to displace the Palestinians, saying that a Palestinian state must be a part of these conversations, especially if they're looking to make peace, or the U.S. is hoping that the Saudis make peace with Israel. Rubio saying, again, Trump was just proposing clearing out and rebuilding Gaza, not indefinite possession. You see a lot of pushback, too, even though Trump said, yeah, sure, we could send troops there. The White House saying, no, we're not going to send troops there. So the question here is, how does Trump follow through with a plan to rebuild Gaza without promising money and not promising troops to secure the situation? So I think there's a lot of questions here. The King of Jordan is set to come to the U.S. to meet with Trump in the coming days. And so we'll watch all of this unfold. But you have problems. Hamas still leads Gaza. Most of Gaza is destroyed due to the war, due to the Israeli bombing there. So what to do over the next decade plus to rebuild the place? Where do most of those people go? Whether it's temporarily or permanent relocation. Who's talking to the Palestinians? Are there some Palestinians there that might say, yeah, I don't want to live here anymore? Perhaps. The problem we have with this whole situation is it is very hard to get a gauge for the Palestinian population of Gaza while Hamas still rules it. People scared to speak a certain way. And so are there some people who might take that offer? Sure. Are there some people who say, no, Gaza's my home and I want to stay here forever? Absolutely. How do we get to that? And how do we get to a situation where the Palestinians can actually dictate their own future? I think that's part of the frustration here. Trump throwing out his ideas. They got a lot of pushback. Back to the drawing board, I guess, at this point.
I was listening to an interview with Dan Senor. He has a podcast called Call Me Back. He wrote the book Startup Nation about Israel.
Yeah, longtime foreign policy expert, knows the region very well.
And one thing that he said, which was that while this specific plan is completely unrealistic, given all of the reasons that we laid out, The one thing that Trump did say that makes sense is that whatever's been going on for the past decades is not working. It
80
doesn't
years.
work. It does not work. So the idea of we're going to have a ceasefire, there's going to be rebuilding, Hamas in some form still involved in Gaza, it just doesn't work. It's this vicious cycle. So Trump throwing something against the wall here to perhaps see if the players in the region can think differently about the future.
Yeah, his whole philosophy here is incremental action hasn't worked. So let's do something drastic. If it's not my plan, you come up with something great. Otherwise, we're going with my plan, is your sort of general take on what Trump had to say there. But yeah, you know, the Middle East has been the Middle East for a very long time. So who has some new ideas?
Okay, time for the speed read from Fox News. Exactly 1 week after a passenger plane and Army Black Hawk helicopter crashed midair near D.C., killing 67 people, a Japan Airlines plane and a Delta Airlines plane had a slow motion collision in the taxi line to take off on Wednesday. It happened at Seattle Tacoma International Airport at about 10:15 local time on a ramp on a taxi line to the runway. It involved a taxiing Japan Airlines aircraft that appears to have struck the tail of a parked Delta Airlines aircraft, according to the airport.
Yeah, we posted some video of that. People taking video being like, oh my God, over at SeaTac Airport there. It did limit landings and takeoffs for a short time there. No injuries were reported. Apparently, the Delta plane was being de-iced as the Japan Airlines plane was making its way around it, or attempting to make its way around it. Both airlines were able to safely deplane passengers, bring them to the terminal. But of course, this is top of mind here, given that mid-air collision that took place in D.C. last week. The issue here, and this is something we discussed on my podcast with Peter Greenberg a few days ago, is the FAA has effectively approved most of the airline requests here for more and more and more and more takeoff slots. In some cases, every 2.5 minutes, you have a plane taking off. So that packs the taxi line, that packs the area. They're all crisscrossing. The air traffic controllers are understaffed, as we've discussed. And so these types of things happen. And so one of the things that may come out of this FAA report about the DC collision is, hey, we got to slow it down. We got to slow our roll here at the airports. But slowing our roll means less planes take off, means less money. And that's not, what the airlines desire. So look out for that discussion and whether there's some hardball played with the airlines here or whether the FAA will continue to acquiesce to the airlines.
Back to politics here from the New York Times. A federal district court judge in Maryland yesterday blocked President Trump's attempt to eliminate automatic U.S. citizenship for children born to undocumented or temporary immigrants on U.S. soil. The nationwide injunction was issued by Judge Deborah Boardman. She was nominated to the bench by President Biden. This applies nationally, and it is more permanent than the 14-day temporary restraining order that was issued on January 23rd by a federal judge in Seattle that we had told you about a couple of weeks ago. In most cases, a preliminary injunction remains in force until a case is resolved or a higher court overturns it. The judge here saying, quote, the executive order conflicts with the plain language of the 14th Amendment, contradicts 125-year-old binding Supreme Court precedent, and runs counter to our nation's 250-year history of citizenship by birth.
The judges here have been pretty blunt about Trump's attempt to effectively overturn the 14th Amendment or parts of it with an executive order. And so she said, the judge here, the U.S. Supreme Court has resoundingly rejected the president's interpretation of the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. She's probably referring to, there's an 1890s case that we've been talking about here. In this case, the plaintiffs are 5 pregnant women who do not have lawful immigration status and 2 nonprofits that work with immigrants. The judge justified her national injunction because one of the plaintiffs has members in every state, including hundreds of pregnant women who could give birth in the coming weeks. So for now, the law stands. The 14th Amendment, as it has been interpreted, stands. Trump wants to end birthright citizenship. He wants to say that anyone born here to someone here temporarily or illegally is not an American citizen. We need to reinterpret birthright citizenship. Until now, the 14th Amendment, as you stated, the judge said, well, no, everyone born here, regardless of their parents' citizenship status, is an American. He wants to rethink that. That's been part of the goal here, the executive order. But the problem is an executive order is not a law. An executive order is not a constitutional amendment. And so far, the judges have thrown it out. They're hoping to appeal, take it to a higher court here. And if the EO, executive order here, gets overturned and isn't considered by the Supreme Court, ultimately, next up for him will probably be trying to push legislation over there on Capitol Hill, which will be much more challenging than just him signing an executive order at his desk.
From the Wall Street Journal, the Central Intelligence Agency offered buyouts to its entire workforce on Tuesday in what officials said is a bid to bring the agency in line with President Trump's priorities, including targeting drug cartels. The CIA appeared to be the first intelligence agency to tell its employees that they can quit their jobs and receive about 8 months of pay and benefits, part of Trump's plan to downsize the federal government. The offer last month made to most civilian federal agencies exempted some categories of federal workers, like those with national security roles. The agency is also freezing the hiring of job seekers who've already been given a conditional offer. Some are likely to be rescinded if the applicants don't have the right background for what Trump says is the agency's new goals, and that includes undermining China and his aggressive trade policies. Across government agencies, overall interest in the deferred resignation offer appears to be pretty low. Trump administration officials have said the offers are also meant to signal to those who oppose Trump's agenda that it's time to find work elsewhere. John Ratcliffe telling the White House to extend the same buyout package to the CIA, believing that it would pave the way for a more aggressive spy agency.
Yeah, he said on Capitol Hill, to the brave officers listening around the world, if what I'm saying sounds like what you signed up for, buckle up. If it doesn't, get a new line of work. And so they're being super aggressive here with these buyout offers. And so we will see if people take it, how many people take it here. The CIA, we should say, not doing stuff altogether very different from their previous agenda. The U.S. has had a super aggressive stance against China and some of these other Trump priorities here in previous administrations, but they're looking to take it up a notch. And I think ultimately this speaks to them trying to find savings and also try to find slots in which they can put more loyalists that are in line with all parts of their agenda, as opposed to longtime people who might push back at times from things they want to do. While we're on the topic of the CIA, there was a headline that came out yesterday, concerning headline for some intelligence experts, that the CIA sent an unclassified email recently with a list of all employees they recently hired. This was part of their attempt to comply with the president's executive order to reduce the federal workforce. The fact that the CIA sent an unclassified email that listed the first names and first initial of everyone who's been hired in the past couple of years means that now those people, who, by the way, are adversaries, China, Russia, they're all trying to figure out who's in the CIA for obvious reasons, might be able to gain access to it. Asked about this, a CIA official said the CIA was just complying with the executive order. The Office of Personnel Management, where this request came from for all the names, doesn't have a classified communications network. So the CIA apparently sent an unclassified email with the first names and initials, with the first names and the initials of the last names of these employees. And so there you have it. Probably not great that this piece of information leaked out. So now, China and Russia could, did you guys see there's an email that's out there? We should go find that email. And that's one of the concerns here, back to the Elon Musk conversation, is that you have a lot of folks without security clearance now getting into the computer systems of the government, creating new vulnerabilities potentially for hacking. So something to track.
And finally, from the New York Post, hot take or just hot air. Several social media influencers are sparking controversy for decrying the presence of men in their boutique fitness classes, saying that yoga and Pilates should be strictly for girls. So the men, they say, are always, quote, grunting, slurping, and heavy breathing in the workout classes, with their, quote, annoying behaviors disturbing the rest of the females in attendance. Alexandra Gula, who is a Miami-based TikToker, griped about a particular man who disrupted her Zen hot yoga class with his behavior by doing push-ups before the class started. Apparently, he was breathing heavily, grunting, and also slurping his water during the group workout, which she says is meant to be quiet and peaceful. And then she added, "We all secretly hate you." Ouch.
Yeah, this guy sounds really annoying, Jill.
Other women apparently feeling similarly to Gula, such as a content creator named Riley. She admitted in a viral clip that her day is automatically ruined if there is a man in her Pilates class. Some people were calling her out, saying her remarks are sexist. And some men chimed in that they now feel hesitant about attending classes, given the judgment that they're getting. But many TikTokers agreeing with Gula, and they say that some of the men's behavior is obnoxious and irritating.
I think that's part of the goal. I think they wanted that to happen. Like less guys in the class. These guys are like, well, I don't know if I should show up to class. Mission accomplished, say some of these women. Apparently, anecdotes listed in this New York Post story that one woman said that she had to stop going to morning hot yoga because a guy was sweating on her mat, and that's never happened next to another girl. Apparently, one woman described that she was at a yoga sculpt class, and the man kept throwing his 25-pound dumbbells on the ground every time he finished them. And so, everyone has their shtick. It's the group fitness challenge. You try to make some space around you, but these rooms are super small. And so you put your mat. And so, maybe there's like men only sections in the future where they, like the slurping section, the grunting section. And then...
I used to do a lot of these classes when I was young and hip.
And you were living in New York City.
And I was living in the city. And now I just do Peloton by myself. So the only one who bothers me is me, basically.
Michael's not sweating on you and grunting and slurping.
No. But I do kind of feel bad for the men, I have to say. But I don't know. I'm not
deserve
such a
boutique
hater.
fitness classes too, Jill. Some of these classes go for like $40 a pop, right? So, let the men paid, they get their experience. But maybe they set up like exclusive women's classes if you're, annoyed by this sort of thing, right?
I think that's probably the answer. Join a all women's gym, or maybe some of these classes should think about all female offerings.
No slurping, man. Just drink your water.
Drink your water quietly. No grunting.
No, that's the point of the class. Let it all out.
No farting while you're doing yoga. They didn't mention that.
Some of you might have experienced that. All right. On this day in history, we begin here with two items that Mark has given us. If you listened yesterday, you know that Mark was a listener who complained that
he's a friend of mine, by the way.
He's a friend of yours, and he complained that we're using some of the same stuff every year. He remembered what we said last February 2nd or 3rd, and we did it again, and he's like, what the what? I'm looking for some new stuff. So I challenged Mark. I go, you give me some new stuff for this February 6th, and he delivered. Today is Ronald Reagan's birthday. We recently had President's Day, so relevant. That's one from Mark. Two, Of Mice and Men was published on this day in history. So, Mark, thank you for those. Meanwhile, you can tune out now because I'm going to bring you a couple things that I told you about last February 6th. First of all, today happens to be the 92nd anniversary of the 20th Amendment getting implemented. You might know the 20th Amendment as the one that moved up Inauguration Day from March to January when this country first started. We had 4 months between Election Day in November. We were a horseback society back then, so it took a while to bring government to Washington. By the early 20th century, they're like, yeah, this long lame duck period is not a great idea. Let's make it 10 weeks after Election Day, moving up Inauguration Day to January 20th.
Right, and they're also much quicker now at switching out the White House decor. They do it in basically 5 hours.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing that at the moment Biden leaves the White House and Trump leaves the White House to go to the inauguration on the Capitol, they had 5 hours to switch out all the furniture, all the clothes, whatever, and they accomplished that amazing feat over there. Back to on this day in history, on this day in 1952, King George VI died. And Princess Elizabeth, the oldest of his daughters, succeeds him as Queen Elizabeth. She was in Kenya at the time. She was officially crowned Queen Elizabeth II at age 27.
I remember it From The Crown, of course, like most people of our generation.
I was wondering where you're going with it. I was like, Jill, you remember it from 1953.
And like it was yesterday.
Like it was yesterday, 1952. No, The Crown does a good job. The show does a good job of depicting the shock and how that all went down. Since we don't have a February 7th on this day this year, because on Fridays we do Cheers to the Weekend, I will mention that on this week in history, February 7th, 1988, Michael Jordan made his signature slam dunk from the free throw line. This would inspire the Jumpman logo. You know that Michael Jordan logo? That comes from an actual dunk he made this week in 1988 at the NBA slam dunk competition.
Moshe, speaking of Michael Jordan, and I know that you love a Michael Jordan reference, anything really related to Michael Jordan as a Chicagoan. Somebody had messaged me because I was asking about some of the things that we say, that some of the expressions perhaps that we overuse. And they were like, no. We don't want to kind of like overcorrect. Like when people started to be critical that Michael Jordan was always sticking out his tongue. The person said, you guys do you, don't let us, micromanage that. So I mention it because I know that you're a huge Michael Jordan fan.
I'm going to start sticking out my tongue during the podcast. From Michael Jordan to Montel Jordan, on this day 30 years ago, This Is How We Do It. Was released, iconic song from the 90s. And finally, we end here with an anniversary for another iconic song, Bugler's Dream, written in 1958 by Leo Arnault. It would become the official theme of ABC's television coverage of the Winter Olympics in France on this day in 1968. John Williams would eventually incorporate it into his iconic Olympic theme. This is all based on a cavalry trumpet's call dating back to the days of Napoleon in France.
All right, a couple of things I know you love there. And on this day, anything Olympics related and Michael Jordan, right?
Yeah, I think mission accomplished, Jill.
All right, thanks everybody.
I hope Mark was happy. That's who mattered today.
Thank you all for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our ability to cut down on our go-to expressions today. We'll see how we do. Well, we'll see how we do tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Friday, though. Let us do our thing.
Okay, Moshe, etc., etc.,
etc., etc.
Bye, everyone.